Well, g'day there again, everyone. Dave O, Recovery Now. So part two in my little three-part series about my story. Currently, I've set the camera up. Those who live in Cowra, you probably work out, it's precariously duct taped to the side of the water tower here, facing back towards the PRW camp. That's those who live in the Big Smoke, that's where you live, out there. So we're facing directly east, back towards Sydney at the moment, over the top of the PRW camp. For those of you that don't know the story of the breakout, the PRW breakout in Cowra, definitely worth looking up and having a look in the history of the town. I won't waste any of my time here talking about it, but it's certainly a big part of the town's history here, and a story worth looking at. I think it's still rated as the most amount of prisoners of war that ever break out of an intern camp in a world war. Anyway, on to part two about my story. Where to start? So in part one you saw a little bit about where I'm from and where I grew up, and a little bit about my family and where I went to school and what I did when I left school. I suppose part two and part three are really about getting down to the nitty gritty. I promise that these videos will be short. This one's probably going to be a little bit longer. I'd say it may go for about 10 minutes. So I'll apologise in advance. Might be worth watching in 2 5-minute sections. For me, I suppose I can start a little bit at the end. For those that are catching up to the story, it's currently November 2016. I had an intervention from a group of friends in around about July 2016, a few months ago. And since then I've been, it took a little while, a few weeks, consulting a doctor and a counsellor. I ended up in a rehab facility in Sydney. Had a 21-day course there. I've since left that. I've participated in a 4-day course, which I'll talk, a 4-day family course, which I'll talk more about later. I've since then been I've worked in hospitality for a long time, worked in sports administration, and a few other jobs. I've never really went to university or anything like that. It's something that I'm certainly looking, that'll be a bit more about part three, something that I'm looking at doing in the future. So we pick up from part one, all the basic information about what I did when I left school and when I was in Sydney, and that's certainly from what the intervention was about was my drug use, and things that were going sort of right and wrong in my life. Well, interventions aren't about what's going right in your life, it was certainly about what was going wrong. My recreational, for want of a better term, drug use kicked off probably early 2000s. Was using ecstasy, and that sort of manifested into cocaine use after a few years in the the Sydney eastern suburbs, pub and party scene, Kings Cross, Double Bay, Paddington, probably the 3 suburbs that'll resonate with anyone that's had a few beers in those areas. For me, I think my drug use certainly was recreational. I didn't think it had anything to do with the makeup of who I was as a person, or it was something that I certainly, and I know a lot of my close mates at the time were questioning why I was engaging in drug use, when I was certainly the person that enjoyed a few beers, was one of the leaders of the pack when it come to charging the bar and switching over to rum and cokes and having a good time and hitting the dance floor and that sort of thing. I certainly, from that perspective, from a personality perspective, it was certainly seen as a bit of a weird thing for some of my close friends who didn't engage in drug use, and I sort of fobbed that off as, well, they don't understand and they don't use drugs and haven't had a good time like I have on drugs, and I just sort of continued, and it very much was a recreational habit of mine. It wasn't something that I yearned for during the week, for example. It was certainly something that coincided with an event or going out for a decent party with mates or whatever, and that sort of thing. It was seen as an enhancement of the evening, as most people would call it. That was sort of my 20s. I'm currently 35. The Olympics were on in Sydney. Sydney was still is a pretty cool place to live, and I was living in the eastern suburbs. I was playing rugby, I was coaching rugby, And I was certainly engaging in those sort of social scenes where it seemed to sort of play hard and party hard. Was certainly the way that that I approach things. We have a good time on the field, whether I was on the sideline or out on the field, and then it was all about having a few beers and kicking on in the night and celebrating with your teammates and that sort of thing. To add to, I suppose, the backstory leading into part 3 of the series, where I'll talk more about rehab and some of the issues that I've had. Again, for those who are catching up the story, I'm currently 35. Only 2 years ago, I came out of the closet and told my parents and my family that I'm gay. And this is where we start to, I suppose, get a bit of a mishmash of drug use, drug dependency, drug abuse, was maybe rearing its head, or where the stories intertwined, and things made a bit more sense, I suppose, when I got into rehab, about the why factor. Why drugs? Why me? When certainly people were saying that it wasn't something that I needed to be engaging in that sort of behaviour. I'm also a survivor of sexual abuse from a very young age, from someone outside of my family when I was growing up. And that's also, I suppose, an extremely significant part to my story. Those people that have been on my website and have seen the story, the press piece that was written as well by Belinda. There's some pretty comprehensive information in there via the Facebook page. Back to my website, you can click through and have a bit of a look if you want to see a text version of the interview. Obviously we didn't do a video version of the interview, so there's only a text version, but you can have a bit of a look, and she certainly captured a lot of those sorts of residual issues that led to my drug use in that story. So what I'm basically doing in these 3 parts is just giving you from the horse's mouth a video version, because this is what we want recovery now to be all about. It's about getting on camera and sharing the emotion of the story. Those pretty significant, having to battle my sexuality for a very significant part of my life, or the majority of my life, and I certainly feel when I came out, another part of the story recently, I, having worked in hospitality, had a great opportunity to come back to Cowra, having been worked in metropolitan areas, Sydney and Perth mainly, to take up a lease, a 2-year lease, on a pub, the very nice family bistro pub here in town, and that was certainly a very exciting time for my family and for me, and it was great. We took over the pub from some family friends who own the building and the business, and it's a nice pub with no poker machines, no sort of local drinkers. It's very much a bistro pub with a very good reputation for good food and good times, and working in that sort of environment, having worked in quite a few pubs that have the poker machines and the sports bar and the front bar and the local drinkers and stuff like that. It was very, very much a refreshing change to get in the industry and be able to work in that sort of environment. At the end of year 1 of that lease, having coached the first grade team here in town, I decided to tell my parents that I was gay. And I cannot, again, I've mentioned this already a few times, I can't say how much the collective hug that came from the town, my family friends, long-term family friends, my family, people about my sexuality was just, I was bewildered. It was amazing. It really is exactly what everyone says it is when you come out. The love and the understanding and the pain that people shared with me, having to not really own that. There was certainly, amongst my group of friends and close family and friends, there was certainly an inkling that maybe I was, and there'd been rumours and all sorts of things and some innuendo, and that was fine. It was hard to deal with that through my late 20s, but I certainly said to myself and had mentioned to one very close friend that, when the time was right, I would deal with this, and it would be something that I would own, and it would something that I would do in my own time, in my own space, and I'm very lucky that it didn't, that experience certainly didn't unravel in a negative way against my will, and I know for some people that has certainly happened, having seen and heard some stories before, and the end result of that can be pretty ordinary. So I was back home. I was certainly around the people that I loved, and I got to spend the post coming out. I got to spend that time in and around very close family and friends for the next 6 to 12 months. However, part 3 will be more about ICE, a particular drug, the intervention, rehabilitation and recovery. But probably this is where I may just come to the end of part 2 here. That's sort of where we might leave it off. So certainly you've just heard me drop the ICE bomb. And I'll maybe explain a little bit more in part 3 why would I do something like that, but my recreational drug use progressed to using methamphetamine, something I'm certainly not proud of, and it really was the last straw from my friend's perspective. Hence you've already heard about an intervention. I'll tell you more about that, and I'm hoping that those boys will be pretty keen to go on camera and talk about that experience as well, because I think that's an important thing to share out there in the market, not the marketplace, in the community, about the power of friends, the power of the people that you associate you with. I wouldn't be here right now, standing here talking to you about my recovery process if it wasn't for my friends and my family. Yeah, it's a bit emotional to talk about that sort of thing. It's tough. Yeah, I'll talk more about that in part 3.